The Qatar Grand Prix 2024 is in the books, and Max Verstappen shows what he's made of both on and off the track. Let's have a chat. First of all, congratulations to Max Verstappen, who won the 2024 Qatar Grand Prix from not quite pole, extending his now insurmountable lead at the top of the driver's standing. But the story of this race cannot be told without rewinding back 24 hours to the qualifying of Saturday night, where on two non-competitive laps, George Russell and Max Verstappen almost came to blows. And we find out that Max Verstappen was subsequently summoned to the steward's room alongside George Russell and got what I can only describe as the least precedented penalty ever, a one-place grid penalty for impeding on a non-competitive lap. And from what we understand, George was pretty loud about it. George really, really wanted that penalty. This is what Max had to say about it. Honestly, it was very disappointing because I think we're all here. We respect each other a lot. And of course, I've been in that meeting room many times in my life, in my career, with people that I've raced, and I've never seen someone try to screw someone over that hard. And that for me, I lost all respect. And he doubled down on that with his Dutch interview with Viaplay, where he got a bit personal with George. He says, he always acts extremely polite in front of the cameras, but if you sit together with him personally, he's a completely different person. I truly can't stand that. You might as well get lost. I don't want anything to do with you. And there are a couple of little expletives added in there for fun, but not for our viewing public. And on the face of it, yeah, I mean, Max is right. It was a completely nonsense penalty. They were both on non-competitive laps. George admitted he was basically just prepping his tires, and Max said, well, look, I was just trying to be nice. I'm not going to be nice anymore. So really, why was there a penalty? Well, there was a penalty because George Russell sat there and really, really went for it. Can you really be annoyed at George Russell for doing racing driver things? I don't think so. Like, ultimately, every driver out there on the grid, whether it's Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, anyone, when there's a penalty to be had for another driver that is going to gain them an advantage, this would essentially put George Russell on pole for the main event on Sunday, is going to go out there and try and get a penalty. So Max doing that, saying that, I think maybe isn't quite getting the gist of what that part of being a racing driver is about. Is that a hole in his armory? I think it probably isn't, but we're going to come to that in a second because he does have a major comeback. But in essence, no, I don't have a big problem with George Russell going for it. If Max is going to be angry at anyone, it's got to be at the stewards for giving what is an unbelievably silly penalty. One place as anyone. If someone can tell me where someone has been given a one-place grid penalty for whatever the infringement was, please let me hear it. Even the FIA, the stewards said, look, this is because of the minor nature essentially of the infringement, that neither of them was on a hot lap. We have to give this unprecedented penalty. I don't agree with the penalty. I think the stewards were overly influenced by George Russell's parading and haranguing in the stewards room. But ultimately, I can't really blame George for it either. But what was interesting is how this then played out. This is what Christian Horner had to say via Sky F1. I think there was a little bit of a moment between the two of them on the trailer as they go around the circuit or whatever earlier. And George sort of corroborated that as well by saying that Max kind of said that he was going to come through. Max did do that, didn't he? George tried to play this whole thing down by saying, oh, yeah, I just didn't get a good start. I saw that start. It wasn't that bad a start. I think George got a bit scared of the big guy on track, and ended up losing 2 places off the grid. Max was coming through no matter what. George may have made it easy for him, but I think there was a little bit of the playground politics at play here. There's something in that, something fundamental that goes back to when Max was driving around sodden racetracks in the middle of the Netherlands with a helmet that's too big for his head, but with his dad always in the background, telling him what was right, what was wrong, not just with how he was holding on to the steering wheel, not just with how he was dancing on the pedals, but what is right and what is wrong when it comes to racing. Because Max, when it comes down to it, doesn't want things decided in a steward's room. He never has. In fact, I can't actually think of a proper incident of him lobbying the stewards for somebody else to get a penalty. I genuinely can't remember an incident where that's happened. If somebody can, please get in the comments and tell me, because I think this is a guy that wants to solve things on track. But his gift is that he knows how good he is. That's what gives him the confidence to settle these things on track, while others need every advantage that they can get. He doesn't need that. And other drivers know that. So when he turns up and he says, I'm going to get you into the first corner, George Russell has to take that seriously, because ultimately there's a little nagging doubt in the back of his head where George is thinking, I've watched this guy in karts, I've raced against him in karts, and I know what he is capable of. If he tells me he is going to come through at turn one and he is angry, he's motivated by what I did in the steward's room, I should just back off. And if that is the mentality that everybody else that's going into a race competing with Max Verstappen is going in with, you've already lost the race. And that's how it played out. But there was a race to run. Let's have a little chat about that, because Max, from the front, essentially was unchallenged. Yes, Lando Norris was behind him. And yes, he got to within maybe 1.6, 1.2 seconds of him at one point. But he was penaltied out of contention, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But remember, this is the same Max Verstappen that was sixth on the sprint grid on the Saturday, but on pole position, but for a ridiculous penalty for the actual race. Now, that was a massive, massive turnaround. Yes, Max drove brilliantly. Yes, Max put it all on the line for that balls out qualifying lap. But to say that that was all him, I think is unfair. Red Bull used the time between the sprint qualifying, they used the sprint race, and they used their simulator drivers back in Milton Keynes to try and come up with a solution that would get Max to the front of the grid. And you can see on our video on Max's qualifying lap just how that played out for him under his right foot. This is going to annoy some of you, but not only did Max extend his own lead, but he also extended the RB20's super time ahead of its rivals. Now, I know some of you guys are going to quote Andrew Benson from BBC Sport. You're going to quote The Race. You're going to quote all these sources that tell you that if you start deleting races from the beginning of the season, Max hasn't had the quickest car. Well, sure, but those races did happen, and they do contribute to the mean super time of the RB20 compared to its rivals. And at this race, you can see here on our graph that, as ever, the Red Bull RB20 is still the class of the field over the course of the season. And actually, there's been a bit of a renaissance, as it were, for this car. Okay, it wasn't the fastest in Brazil, and it wasn't the fastest in Vegas, but on a high-speed track where aero efficiency is king, there was no rival to it come Sunday. And that's how it played out. And let's be honest, it would have been a pretty dull race had it not been for Alex Albon. Why? What did Alex Albon do? I hear you ask. Well, he had a little ding-dong with Lance Stroll somehow loosening up his wing mirror, which then went flying onto the pit straight. And that led to probably the most interesting part of this race, and something that we should probably get into now, because rather than putting out a VSE, putting out a safety car, the initial response from Rui Marquez, the brand new race director who's only been in there now for 2 full races, was to just put out some double waved yellows. And they were out there for 5, 6, 7 laps, and it was pretty obvious that if you were going to just have double wave yellows, number one, you weren't going to get any overtaking for the rest of the race, because that was the only place where you could get DRS, the only place where you could make an overtake. And second, what are we doing here? What is going on? Like, if you actually want to have a race, let's get rid of the debris. It's not in a safe place. And that's how it played out, because Valtteri Bottas, knowing that there was debris there, went offline. That was the excuse. Well, we're offline, so therefore we don't need to do anything. Went offline under blue flags and ran over this debris, which subsequently led to two big fat punctures for Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz. We'll talk about Lewis's race a bit later, but right now, this is what happened. And safety car was finally put out. In the middle of all of that, Lando Norris decided not to lift off the throttle under double wave yellows. Max had clearly learnt from George Russell that if you want to get a competitive advantage, you need to get your rivals penalties. So what was he doing while he was lifting off down the straight under double wave yellows? He was looking at his dash, looking at the delta behind him. And guess what? Lando Norris had not been lifting off. And Max was the one that pointed it out. As we all know, listening to Martin Brundle for years and years and years mean slow down and prepare to stop. He didn't do that. And he got a 10-second stop go penalty. Let's just have a little look at some of those things. First of all, what was the FIA's explanation for not bringing out a safety car? So they said normal practice is for the safety car not to be deployed if there is a small amount of debris and off the racing line. The extensive debris after a car hit the mirror and the punctures that occurred shortly after forced the decision on a safety car. Well, okay, yes, the rules do not stipulate that you must send out a safety car. They do not stipulate that you should have a VSC, but come on. It was so obvious that that little mirror was going to be hit by someone. And all it took was Valtteri Bottas to go offline. Yes, it was offline, of course, fine. But it's offline on the pit straight where cars are going to weave. They're going to try and overtake. They're going to have to move over to let other cars go past them because they're under blue flags. This is just going to happen. That is what happened. Poor old Valtteri Bottas was the first one over. And then poor old Carlos and Lewis were subsequently after that as well. And we ended up with two, frankly, unnecessary left front punctures. So I'm not sure I completely buy the FIA's stance on this. And this ultimately comes back to the crisis. And it's nothing short of that at the FIA right now. Mohammed bin Sulayem seems to want to run the FIA on his own as some kind of malevolent dictator. And I use malevolent in its entirety. There have been so many firings, resignations, sackings at the FIA this year. The only positive thing that I thought the FIA had done, despite MBS being there, was that they were bringing in changes that were positive, getting staff in from teams that had experience of motorsport, getting staff in from other industries that had experience of management. These are the things that you want in your managing body, in your governing body. But MBS seems to be eroding that on a weekly basis. I understand that this was not a difficult decision to make, but Rui Marquez is brand spanking new in this role. Niels Wittig was making sort of bad decisions in complex situations. Rui Marquez is currently so overloaded with his job that he is making mistakes with simple decisions. This would not be happening if our previous race director was still there. MBS, come on. This is a sport that we all love. It's not just about you and your power-hungry crusade. Save our sport. Don't be silly. Okay, but let's just talk about Lando. Huge amount of discourse on social media. Number one, should he have been penalised in the first place? Well, let's just have a little look. These are stills from the video that F1 put out of Lando's onboard as he went through the yellow flag area. As you can see very clearly in the first picture, there is the marker board that says there is a yellow flag flashing in front of you. And as he goes down the straight a bit further, just to avoid any doubt, there is a marshal with two waved yellow flags. Bang, two rights. Lando needed a penalty. But what about the penalty? Was it too hard? Well, is there precedence? Yes, there is. Austria 2021, yellow flags towards the end of the race. Nikita Mazepin and Nicholas Latifi, highly qualified and competitive Formula One drivers, failed to slow for the yellow flags and were both given post-race stop-go penalties. 30 seconds added to their race time at the end of the race, similar to what Lando got. It's just par for the course, man. When you are going through double wave yellows, you just have to take your foot off the pedal. If you want to have a full and in-depth explanation of how this all played out, go check out Shifting Happens, our friendly podcast with our mates Double Waved Yellow and BaxDB. Marshall there is explaining the highlights of this in great detail. But for me, that was a slam dunk penalty. Whether the yellow flag should have been there or not, and I don't think there should have been a safety car. Lando is bound to rights. And there it is. We're going to have a little chat about some drivers leaving their teams in a subsequent video, so stay tuned for that. But that was the race, Qatar 2024. A Max Masterclass, slightly dull race, saved by an errant wing mirror. As usual, if you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one and we'll reply to as many as we possibly can. Ammar will be back hopefully this week. He says he's flying back from New Zealand and I hope to see him soon because I can't keep doing this on my own. You guys don't want that either, but we will see you guys in the next one.